Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Selling, a look ahead with Uber executives. We're going to get started with our content program here in just a few minutes. But before we jump in, we'd love to get a chance to meet our panelists, not just as amazing executives at Uber. We're going to share a ton of expertise with you, but we're going to get to know them a little bit more as people. John, Christophe, thank you for taking some time today. Really excited to have you here. Before we jump in, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you. John, where are you excited to travel to once you can finally get out and travel? Where are you excited to go? On vacation, not just like around the house.
Thanks for asking, Richard. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and excited for the conversation today. As some of you can tell from my accent, even though I'm dialing in from headquarters in San Francisco, I'm actually an Australian, an Irish Australian to be exact. So the first place I'm looking forward to go back to is my homeland of Australia. My family is. I'm very, very excited to see them again and to taste some of the local food and maybe see an Australian koala or two.
Excellent. That's not exactly a around the house trip. That's a pretty good vacation too.
It's a bit of a hop.
I believe it. How about you, Christophe? Thank you for joining us. Where are you excited to head to?
I think I would like to travel with John and go to Australia, but
I think that'd be cool.
I also need to admit that I'm just back from a trip to Corsica, which was just fantastic. So travel is good, and when there is life, there is travel. But what I am really missing in the pandemic is this ability to go skiing. So my next trip, when all of this craziness is over, is I want to go back skiing.
That's great. I think we could do, we could take this content around the globe. We could first go with John and go visit down under, and then maybe we take a skiing trip with Christophe, and then we bring it home maybe in Florida, like just hit everywhere.
Yeah, the future of skiing.
The future.
Look ahead with Uber executives.
And along the way, maybe we'll talk about some selling and like building culture and all. All right, folks, really, really excited to have John and Christophe here with us today. We're going to jump into it because we do actually have quite a bit to cover here. So welcome, everyone. As I had mentioned at the start, today we're going to be talking about the future of selling. And this is going to be a discussion between John and Christophe with myself moderating. You're going to get a chance to hear from all of us here in a second. Here's what we're in for today. This is the welcome. You're in the right place. We'll go through a quick overview of what to expect for our session today. We'll go through and we're going to have probably about 40-minute chat between John, Christophe, and myself. And then at the end of the session, we're going to take questions. So we will take questions at the end. Feel free to get those in the Q&A panel as they come. And if we don't get to all of them, don't worry. John and Christophe probably going to follow up with you afterwards to help answer those questions. But as I mentioned, we've got two amazing speakers here today. We've got John and Christophe, both from the Uber for Business team. John heads up the global account management team in Uber for Business. And Christophe is the head of Uber for Business for the EMEA. And my name is Richard Scrow. I'll be the moderator for today. I'm the general manager at Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. I'm really, really grateful to have the opportunity to moderate this conversation. We're going to give John and Christophe a chance to introduce themselves in just a second before we get into some housekeeping notes. As I mentioned, this is super, super important. This helps me do a good job as a moderator and helps make sure the panelists have time to answer questions. Please do use the Q&A panel. You can see it circled right here. If you're unsure where that is, just hover over the bottom of the screen in the webinar, tap that Q&A. You can go ahead and put those in there. And now let's get into an overview of Uber for Business. And John's going to give us a quick run through of Uber for Business. John?
All right, thanks, Richard. So I'm very excited about Uber for Business. I've had the chance to be with Uber for Business for almost 2 years now. And I think everyone on the call would be familiar with Uber and our products like Uber Eats and Uber gift cards. Uber for Business is basically the way that we took all the feedback of like, hey, I love these products as a consumer, but I want to use them for business. How can I make sure they work for my business applications? So it's the same stuff. It's the same, rideshare vehicle. It's the same local deliveries of food or convenience, delivered to your door, but in a way that businesses want to do. For example, allow your team to make a group order for a group lunch. allow employees to take a ride after a certain time, back home because it's a late night ride, allow your customers to get to an event on a particular day in a particular place. We have the privilege of serving over 150,000 companies in 26 countries around the globe. We've existed for about 4 or 5 years, and it's been a pleasure to adapt with each of these companies over the last 12 months as their needs have shifted and our product mix has greatly expanded.
Awesome. And we're going to get to hear more about John and Christophe's background here. So John, we heard from you before, but let's actually hear a little bit more about your background and introduce yourself and share a little bit about what what account management actually is at Uber for Business. Great.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so background-wise, you heard, I grew up in Australia, I lived all the time in Europe, and now I'm here in the States. And that very reflects my responsibility. I'm the global head of account management, which means for those companies that we have all around the world, my job is to make sure they have a great launch with Uber, that they're getting what they need out of the product. And then we look after customer success over the course of their lifetime with Uber, which is, are they making sure that with the product, they understand the features, all the cool things they can do, not just with Uber, but the Uber for Business layer on top. And then do they have exposure, to the other cool products that we offer, in the Uber space? If they're riding with us, they can eat with us, and helping getting executives' questions answered about how we can make the most for their employees and customers. So that's my responsibility.
Awesome. And Christophe, share please a little bit, like John did, about yourself, your background, and what your role is at Uber for Business.
Yes, you will have noticed from my accent. I grew up in France. I studied in France and in Brazil as well. My professional background is in travel. So I was part of the team that started a company called Agencia, which is part of the Expedia group. So I stayed a very long time at Agencia/Expedia, focusing on business travel topics and growing our business. I joined Uber 3 years ago to do basically at Uber what I was doing at Expedia, which is developing a big B2B business within a very large consumer organization. I am based today in Amsterdam, and I am leading our team in Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Exciting. So lots of background, lots of amazing stories and perspective that we have here, folks. Please do submit your questions in the Q&A panel. And as I mentioned, we'll get to those at the end of our session. So today we're going to cover a bunch of topics when we think about the future of selling and the future of sales engagement. We're going to talk about a couple of key topics with our panelists here today. First and foremost, we're going to talk about how to address customer needs in a changing environment. How have things changed? How have things evolved? We're going to talk about the employee perspective as well. It's not just about how we respond as a business to our customers, but it's how do we keep our employees and our organizations functioning at a high level across all of the different transitions they make in day-to-day life. And then finally, we're going to give some maybe perspective or best practices or what the team is seeing around employee travel and trends and anything like that they're seeing from their experience. So with that, John, Christophe, we ready to jump into it? Ian, you ready? Caffeinated?
Let's go.
Let's do it.
I have my hot water. Let's do it.
Let's hop into the fireside chat. So let's talk about some of the insights from the pandemic. And I'm going to hand it off to John here to give a little bit of context on the evolution of the Uber for Business offering and kind of how Uber evolved through all of this.
Thanks, Richard. So as many of you know, Uber's been around for about 10 years. And it was in the very beginning of Uber that we saw that some of the power users were business users. And this was great. They took their Uber and then they expensed it to their own personal system. It was much, much better than what they'd done before, with taxi and personal ground transportation and things like that. But eventually, coming to 2016, there was this drumbeat of, hey, I use Uber so much for business. It's the most expense, on Concur. Can you guys create a business layer, a set of business functionality? And that's what happened in 2016. That's why this was created, and that's why we have 150,000 companies that have signed up. So we're all going very, very well. I think some of you remember, in Q1 2020, it was reported we were the fastest growing part of Uber. We're growing 75% year on year. Everything was going dandy. And then the COVID pandemic hits. right? A truly tragic event, and that event is continuing, particularly in different parts around the world. And obviously from an Uber for Business point of view, not only was personal travel hit, but business travel was hit the most. Some of our most important partners are folks in professional services, companies that rely on the transfer of human capital from one country to another. These are people who are time poor, expense rich, and they spend a lot on our platform because we help them save time, in their transportation and in their expensing. And all that kind of went away, in the pandemic. And so that was obviously a big threat, not just personally, to our public health, right, but to the business as well. I think the silver lining is it forced us to adapt. And you can see Q2 2020, we added Uber Eats, which is the same Uber Eats function that has been known and loved for the last 4 or 5 years, but with a business layer. As I said, the group ordering, the ability to kind of give vouchers, the ability to kind of like have controls over how much budget people have and order through a web interface. This was added. Other things too, like gift cards and vouchers and the ability to kind of buy a trip for your employee, for your customer to get to your store. And effectively what happened is the pandemic forced Uber for Business to be much more than a one-trick pony, much more than just getting your employees from A to B, and much more so about how to help your employees and your customers be happier, feel valued, not just save expenses, but generate leads as well by getting customers to your store. And what we have seen in the year since this terrible pandemic has started is U4B has seen 30 times growth in terms of what is happening with Uber Eats. The number of organizations has actually skyrocketed. It's gone up 23%, in the last 6 to 9 months. I mean, incredible stuff. As we know, this has been a bit of a K-shaped recovery for the world. And for better or for worse, we've been very fortunate at Uber for Business that in helping us diversify our product mix and helping people ask, whoa, how can I help my employees and my customers during this difficult time? Uber for Business has grown remarkably so in a way that we did not expect.
I appreciate a lot of that context, and we're going to dive into some of the unique things that you've seen and that Uber for Business and Uber in general has done and is doing. But John, I want to take it almost a level higher with the background of everything that you saw. What have you really learned from this from a selling standpoint? What's changed? What do you think is going to be the same from a virtual selling and from what you've learned in the pandemic in terms of going to market?
I think the biggest thing is that we survived. That's the first thing to celebrate. Like, we are still here. We are still selling. Customers are still buying. In some cases, more than ever. I think, that's the biggest thing to take away. That like the power of what we as a race, we as hardworking folks can overcome. I think if you double click on that, there's a few things there which really strike me. Even though we can't travel, and I really miss seeing, our customers and our team in person, there are efficiencies that you can get by cutting out a commute. And indeed, that means for the future, the right balance is going to be some remote working, some customers and clients in person, and the ability to kind of take that to lean into work-life balance, to use that commute and invest that, hopefully, not just in working harder, which I think is the temptation for all of us, but also opening the doors to meeting more customers and to having a better life, at home. So we are hoping that this is a better way forward.
It's certainly interesting. And Christophe, I know you've seen this from a European perspective as well as in your role at Uber for Business. But what have you seen in terms of changes to the way we sell or behaviors that you're seeing in customers?
I think the first thing for me is that we have all proud by the fact that we have helped the community. And that's what we did on a worldwide basis. We jumped to help essential workers travel and commute to hospitals, clinics, care homes, etc. And I think for me, the first takeaway from this crisis is that thanks to Uber solutions, be it rides, so transportations or its delivery, food delivery solutions, we have helped the community and we tried, as many other business, but we have tried to contribute. The second point for me that comes to mind, and as John mentioned, it works. From a selling point of view, we have managed to sell and engage with customers. So we had to be very targeted and have a very personalized approach because lots of businesses were blasting thousands and thousands of emails. We try to be really targeted by vertical, by persona, etc. And for me, we saw two big trends. The first trend, it was already mentioned in this conversation, is that the trends that we see in the B2C world are coming in the B2B world. So the products and the services that resonate in our personal lives are also products and services that we want to find in our professional life. That's first trend. And second big trend that we have seen is a little bit of a change in the way buyers are looking at what they want to find with suppliers. Of course, with a player like us, they want to find safety for their employees. They also want to find cost efficiency, but the notion of corporate social responsibility and going green is really bigger than it has ever been.
I think there's a lot of great points on that, and I think just to kind of wrap up a few thoughts on this, and I know we have some takeaway slides here. Echoing a few things that Christophe said, and I think one of the most salient that we hear time and time again is this consumerization in the B2B world. People are buying cars online, not going to a car dealership anymore, spending tens of thousands of dollars on mattresses. And I think there's some interesting, when you get an Uber voucher now from Uber for Business, I don't go through a different experience. It just shows up in my app. That's the expectation that I would have as a consumer, and that's serving me as a business. And I think also, Christophe, to that point on the corporate responsibility, and I know we'll talk about this a bit more on the employee engagement side, but that's a win across the board. That helps the customers. That's a general good for the world, and it also is something that employees and potential employees get really, really excited about as well. And that's actually a smooth, excuse me, that's a smooth transition into our second point here. Here we go, which is about teams. So we've talked about what John and Christophe have seen kind of externally, what's going on in the world of customers and prospects. Well, let's talk a little bit more about what we're seeing in our organizations. And Christophe, let's start with you on this. What are some of the trends or things that you've seen to kind of help keep your team motivated, on track, engaged, and also not burnt out and performing at a high level?
The first thing we did to keep our team motivated and on track is when COVID hit, we stopped everything. We took a week off to think about what we should do and how we should get organized. So we really defined the way we would communicate with the team, the types of meetings we would have, like team meetings, one-on-one, pipe reviews, but also moments where we can engage, have more casual conversation that we were missing from our life at work. And I think that has been quite important to just reflect on the fact that things were a bit similar, but they were not the same. And we had to find a good way to animate, get the results, but also respect the balance between personal and professional life, and also keep a little bit of an element of fun. You know, it's something that attracts people at Uber. People learn a lot, work a lot, but they also have fun.
And I think that there's a great point in that, especially when you think of some maybe more junior employees, their living room / kitchen maybe became their office as well, and maybe it was shared with a roommate. So really thinking about that whole person and recognizing that there's responsibilities that someone may have taken on, or a work environment that's maybe not as productive as the workstation they had in the office. Really, really great point there. And John, what have you seen in terms of things that have helped keep the team engaged, or things that you thought were really like interesting and helpful for our audience here today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Richard. And I love some of the stuff that Christophe modeled. We were able to kind of take some of that and export it to the rest of the world. I think the Europeans taught the best. But there was kind of 3 phases this for us. I think the first phase, and this is kind of like, going back to the first half of last year, it was kind of just looking after the mental health of our employees. It was like a crazy time. We didn't know what was going to happen. A lot of us, had, elderly parents. We didn't know how deadly this thing was, and it turns out it's pretty deadly. for folks who are stuck at home, particularly, we have a lot of parents, and particularly parents who are looking after younger children. And it was like crazy. It still is crazy. So the first kind of 6 months was about helping people adjust to new normal. A lot of it was giving them the right message, like, okay, we're going to get through this. It's going to be okay, right? And a lot of it was showing that in very practical means, trying to have new hours, trying to have time blocks where we don't meet, trying to actually give benefits, whether that's through counseling services or money to make sure you have a good kind of home office, work office setup. This is what well-being was for the kind of first 6 months. But then, particularly towards the second half of last year, it kind of became the new normal. We didn't know how long it was going to go for. The initial shock had worn off. And that's where we started to get a bit more creative, a bit away from like triage and survival. It's like, how can we make the benefits of this? So one of my engineering teams actually has a Friday weekly online game hour. They compete, for prizes and the adoration of their peers, and that's cool. And that's something which they would have done in the office, but actually is a bit more even equitable here because everyone can join in, even from home, right? Other ones of my teams do like a monthly activity together, right? So we have candle making, we have Earth Day, we had a secret snowflake gift exchange during the holiday season, and using the benefits of whether it's Zoom or kind of like Amazon e-commerce to kind of make sure, that they have something to play with, an activity to do together. So that was cool. But the last 6 months has been a totally different challenge as well. It's gone from being like, oh my goodness, will I have my job, to kind of like, if I can work more remotely, the number of companies I can apply to has greatly expanded, which means that we as our managers, as always, need to raise our game because we have a talented team and they could work anywhere. So this is about trying to make sure that they have career paths and they can see career paths well beyond the pandemic and making sure they feel loved and valued. And I'll talk about this later, but certainly Uber Eats and Uber Vouchers have been very helpful for showing in real time that we appreciate them.
I think that's a great point to this too, especially as we enter the next normal. I think there was a survey that especially folks junior in their career, there's a high expectation that they're going to switch into other roles, other companies, and other organizations. So being mindful of that as a hiring manager now more than ever is great. And I want to double click into a couple of things we had talked about in the prep. And Christophe, there is this really interesting program that the Uber for Business organization has called Coffee Mates. And I think that's a great thing to share with our audience because it's pretty clever, actually. Christophe, could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, listen, Richard, it's not rocket science, but it's bloody efficient. What we are doing is we are building some groups of people who are based across the world, and every month you are part of a new group, and you just take coffee. Like get a voucher, order yourself a coffee or whatever a beverage you like to get or cookie, and you exchange. And I think what is very important is in a global organization, people need to know each other. And this is a way for people to interact in a way where they are building a relationship. Because I think what we need to do is to find ways to build relationship. And relationship building is hard to do on Zoom when you do pipe reviews, customer interaction. So this Coffee Mate idea proved quite successful at Uber for Business.
It's a good one. I feel like everyone can take that home with them right now. If you've got a large, even an organization with 2 or 3 offices, it's a great way to get folks connected. And then, John, what are some of the things that you've done to keep the team engaged? I mean, I love Coffee Mates. It's a great idea, but what else?
Yeah, we've tried to replicate or adapt what we will be doing in person, like Coffee Mates, virtually. And so the classic thing is we tend to have quarterly offsites at each level for the team, or we have monthly socials. And usually what we'll do is on that particular day, in those hours, we have the social is everyone will get an Uber Eats voucher, for $30 or $40, they can go and order something, and we can go through that kind of like that act of eating together as we talk, and we get to do business, but we get to have a bit of fun, and it kind of introduces, and we can talk, hey, what did you order, and what's going on around there? And it kind of helps to break the ice a little. So, that's one of the ways we've kind of, I guess, taken advantage of the virtual situation. I think, Christophe spoke about some of the things we do for the good of the world. I think when you have the situation of the last 18 months, we have effectively a global crisis, which has hotspots that kind of like rise and fall in each place. typically do with the pandemic or related to the pandemic, it allows you to really use, even tools such as email or all hands or virtual meetings to put the spotlight on those things. So for example, even right now, we stand with our colleagues in India. It's a very, very difficult time. Before Latin America had a surge. A year ago, America not only went through its own surge or extended surge, but we had a lot of issues and uprising and discussion around Black Lives Matter movement, George Floyd's and things like that, right? So these particular incidents allowed us to put the spotlight and have a conversation. And what we've done actually as leadership is we've started sharing books about things that can provoke ideas and learn. We've matched donations where people want to say, hey, I really want to give to that cause. I really want to give oxygen, supplementation to folks in India. We're going to kind of match those things. It's been a terrible time for the world, but it's been an opportunity for us to lean in beyond kind of like our day-to-day jobs, learn and contribute to our colleagues who are being affected by different events around the world.
I think it's awesome, and that dovetails back into what Christophe, what you were saying about corporate social responsibility, and that's an expectation. I think that's especially as Generation Z enters the workforce, that's not just a nice to have. It is a table stake for a lot of folks that are early in their careers, and it's great to hear that. A couple takeaways here for the audience. We're not going to read through these, but we've kind of hit on a couple of these topics. Changing gears a little bit, we've talked about keeping employees engaged and motivated and high performing, but let's talk a little bit more about customers and how we keep customers engaged and the things that we've seen that worked really, really well. And John, let's get started with you on this. What are some things that you've learned from how to keep your customers engaged here?
Thanks, Richard. I think, Christophe mentioned some of his background. I also came from a B2B background. I worked, over a decade in Google Cloud, which is kind of the B2B part of Google, which is a consumer company. And my job was to help take the products that people love, like Gmail and Docs and Calendar and things like that, and help businesses use it, just like billions of customers do in their day-to-day non-business lives. And the number one takeaway from all of that, whether it's Google or Uber, is you've got to have a product that just works, that's simple, that's easy, that's friction-free. And that's one of the reasons I joined Uber Business, because Uber just works, and Uber for Business is just as simple. It's business-specific features that just work in the interface and the simplicity that you love with Uber. And even right now, you can go and sign up your business online, and it's easy. And for many of our customers, that's what they want. They just want a great product. They get it. They don't want to talk to us. They don't want it to go wrong. And for those hundreds of thousands of customers, the product just works. But for the customers we have around the world, a lot of them want to be more than just customers. They want to be strategic partners. They don't want to just have a conversation about, hey, how can we save money on taxis, and how can we save time and expenses, which is important. But they want to solve this broader problem of like, how do we help our employees and how do we help our customers save time and feel valued and feel empowered to the range of Uber products. And the cool thing is, well, for those companies, and there are thousands of them, where we have a partnership, where we have an account manager, on my team who's able to have that regular dialogue, that regular brainstorming, we can help them personalize their communications, to their team. We can help them package and say, hey, here are some benefits that we are providing through Uber. So when you're traveling or when you're trying to arrange a corporate event or things like that, it's just easy and it just works. And here's how much the company will pay for it. And what we're able to do is, because we serve 150,000 customers around the world, we can share, hey, another customer in your industry, in your region with the same problem, use this template. And it's anonymized, but here is a great way that they were able to get a lot of their employees to do this. And you can see how it increased their customer satisfaction by X%. So we're able to share the use cases and the best practices. That's very much my team's job, to help folks who want to have a partnership with us, who want to explore the range of how Uber can help their broader business, to make sure they're learning from the very best use cases of how other companies have done it around the world.
And I this may be stating the obvious a little bit, but that's such an important point. As an organization, when you're engaging with customers, you're learning a lot about what's working and what's not. And if you want to be really, really successful and help them grow, you're going to share those best practices in a way that makes the most sense with others in the vertical or others in the region, in a way that's going to help them better utilize the platform, solution, or service there. It's a great point, John. Christophe, what are you seeing some of the trends in terms of keeping customers engaged, and what are some of the things that you're hearing out there?
I think it's very similar to what John just mentioned. I think to keep customers engaged, you need to be curious. You need to ask questions, share best practices in a way where you want to find solutions and improve and deal with the problems that our customers are faced. So it's really be curious, ask questions, share best practices, find solutions, and go fast. Because I think companies have to react, and they still have to react faster and faster.
It's a huge point. I think especially that also coming back to what John had said at the introduction, there's this amount of kind of agility, but customer focus that you have. As long as you keep your nose close to what the customer is doing and what their expectations are, and the user as the customer, it puts you in a position where you can maybe see around some additional corners that you'd otherwise miss. And so we're going to talk now a little bit more about travel and how we're thinking about, returning to the office, which is crazy to think that we're here now. The first thing I want to talk about is for each of your organizations, what travel looks like and how you're thinking about that. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some best practices that you think around supporting your teams. John, let's get started for you, right? You've got a global team. What is travel going to look like for your organization? How are you thinking about this?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I want to approach this question with a lot of humility, because fundamentally, we're still on the precipice. We're still in the not quite yet. We still don't know how this is going to play out. We are hopeful that things will return in terms of the normal flexibility that we had, but we just don't know. So the first thing is, like, we have our ideas and let's see how it works out. I think our ideas right now is we want to kind of make up for lost time. As I said before, like for these, we have hundreds of thousands of customers. We have about 1,000 that we have very close partnership relationships with. The first thing is we'll kind of make up for lost time. We want to get that in-person engagement where we've just had video engagement, with them. And we're very open to traveling. We're very open to go to customer HQ together to kind of visit the important sites, but it depends on what the customer's comfortable with. It depends on their own return to office policies. It depends on how they want to conduct this conversation, because we have been able to form pretty good partnerships, over Zoom. That's a great thing. So it doesn't have to be back in person to be successful. We can survive, but would love it to be. And I think, from the team, really diving in and getting to the customers even better, that will be a fantastic thing. So in answer to the question, our goal is to get back in person, both internally and externally, as soon as possible and as much as it makes sense. But with all humility, we don't know how much customers are going to be willing right now.
It's such an interesting challenge to contend with, because we're such social creatures, right, as human beings. But there's also this, we want to have the utmost respect for what our customers' expectations are and all of that. But the thing, John, that I get a chuckle out of is there's people that I'm sure you've sold to where normally that would have been a handshake and dinner or coffee, and you may have never met them in person. You have no idea how tall they are. I mean, it could be 8 feet tall. That's the crazy part about Zoom. And
That is true.
It's one of those ones where the hiring is kind of the same way there. Christophe, and you've got a unique perspective on this, being based in Europe, where travel, I mean, you could be in 3 different countries over the course of a day for 3 different meetings. How are you thinking about what travel will look like for your team?
So I think we need to remain humble, because we don't know what we don't know. But what I find really interesting is if you look at a region like Europe, where relationship is super important, we have been able to be quite efficient over Zoom in a virtual world. So I think for me, I have doubts that the trips that we were used to doing in Europe, where you take a 7 a.m. plane to fly to Frankfurt and come back to Paris or Amsterdam just for a 45-minute or 1-hour meeting, I'm not sure that it is the best way to take to spend the time of our team and of our folks. So I believe that as we recover and as we go out of this pandemic, things will change. will continue to go and meet with customers for like very important meetings, big meetings, etc. But I think that some travel will disappear, like the daily commute to some European capital for 1 hour 45 minutes. Really? Do you still want to do that?
It sounds like such a glamorous life, though. You can get your coffee and croissant where you need to get it. You can go somewhere else for good beer for dinner.
Yeah, and absolutely, and also it's good for the customers because they can just save time themselves. It's good for the employees because they are less tired. They can be more efficient. So that will be interesting to see.
It's one of those ones where it's also, I think there's probably a pendulum that swings a little bit different by maybe certain verticals as well. John, are you seeing any, I don't want to say trends, but are you getting any early indicators that certain verticals are going to be faster back or more eager for face-to-face than maybe other verticals that are a little bit more reserved?
Yeah, I think, a lot of our most important partners are in professional services like finance, like consulting, and in the technology space. And I think the exciting thing from an Uber business point of view is there is a lot of willingness there to figure out what the new normal looks like and a desire to at least create some, in-person work together. And so what we're seeing from there is a lot of them have been subsidizing, trips during the pandemic so they can come back, to the office and meet together. All of them are really excited about getting back together and using some Uber Eats vouchers and an Eats program, in order to kind of make that a special time together. So we're seeing a lot of focus from those companies of trying to figure out the new normal and figure out how Uber can be a great partner. And I think that's going to continue. I think it's exciting because if people are going to travel now, to Christophe's point, it better be worth their time. It better be something that's not just work. It better be something that's kind of fun as well. That kind of says, hey, I'm a valued employee. And it's been cool how companies have only kind of used Uber to do that. So I would say those particular sectors around technology and professional services, they have been some of the faster moving ones, but now we're seeing, particularly in the US, the UK, a lot of the general companies come back and start to return to the practices of before.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, though, John, when you're talking about, Christophe mentioned this too, if you're traveling for work, I mean, there's a bigger, it's got to be higher ROI because we just made it a year not traveling for work. And there's also, you want to have a good story to tell around that, where it's not just, I'm going to meet with John, I'm going to go close the deal. It's like, no, there's a fun experience that has, I've never met John in person before. We're going to get great lunch from a Thai restaurant delivered or whatever it might be. And that's a pretty clever use case for Uber for Business as well.
Yeah, that's right. And the other cool thing is, given a lot of economies now, you're actually gone for the situation where you had too much supply and not enough demand, to now there is a lot of competition for demand. You are trying to kind of like get customers back in the store. People are out there, they want to spend money again. A lot of folks, a lot of customers are now looking how they can use our products, not just to save costs, on moving employees around or feeding employees, but to get customers in the door and say, hey, customer, if you come to our store, we will pay for your ride, and we'll pay half for your ride. Kind of like what Uber is doing, with vaccines, in many countries as well. So I think it's been cool to see how the platform, which was a bit more of a set of isolated use cases before the pandemic, has much more broadened. And at the prospect of economic recovery, we can play a part both in the top line of revenue increase and not just the bottom line of kind of saving costs and having it more efficiency and trackable.
And I think there's also, there's probably a second order, corporate responsibility component to that too, where you're saying, hey, look, we're helping actually get the, some of these essential workers or getting some of these restaurants some additional business, right? That maybe they otherwise wouldn't have gotten because we're given these vouchers out. I think there's a lot there. And we're almost wrapped up with this portion before we get to conclusions and take some questions from the audience. I do want to talk about how to support your teams going back to the office, and how you're both, again, we're not sure, right? There's a lot of unknowns out here, but just some current thinking. And Christophe, let's start with you. How are you thinking about kind of your team and the return to the office?
So the way we are thinking about returning to the office is to go to a hybrid model. So we would like to have people go back to work 3 days per week and 2 days working from home, starting from September. There are lots of things to take into consideration. So obviously the country where you are working in will have a big impact. So we know that in the US and in Europe, we may be more advanced in terms of vaccination program than it can be the case in other parts of the world. But we believe that going to a hybrid model, 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, will bring a good balance between creating the social link that we need and bringing some flexibility to our employees. And also, which is super important, we want to give a lot of say and a lot of judgment to the managers, because the needs for each and every team is not the same. The need and the constraints for cities and countries are not the same. So the managers will be at the core of the decision making for this return to the office approach.
John, how are you thinking about this with your team? Anything else to add to what Christophe was saying?
I love what Christophe said, and I think so much of it is about the tone of humility, of what can we learn, what worked, we don't know the future, let's have a conversation, let's try and figure out what's going to work and keep you as happy as possible. And I think in particular, how could we take what we learned during the pandemic and keep those as benefits going forward? I think for my team, particularly those who are parents and caregivers, I'm the parent of a 1-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. The ability to work from home has both been incredibly shocking, from like, oh my goodness, everything is happening in my house, what do I do? But also an incredible blessing. The chance to kind of like, look after my kids and see my kids throughout the day, to structure my time in that way. There's something amazing about that. There's something fantastic about that. And, Christophe talked about Uber's policy, which is similar to some other companies around the world. We want to see how we can keep the benefits of that, where caregivers can see more of their children, potentially save, on childcare costs, integrate that into their work life, but also have the benefits of physically seeing customers, physically seeing their team, and having more physical boundaries between home and work. So there's a lot to work out, but we think having flexibility, having a dialogue, having more integration between work and office, but also being able to kind of separate those through, hey, on this day I'm going to work, on this day I'm not. This is all going to be part of the solution.
It seems like there's a lot of opportunity for us to sort of optimize a lot of those experiences there. We're going to get to Q&A in just a second. So I see there's already a couple of questions in the Q&A panel. Please do put any additional ones in there. But just a couple key takeaways if we think about today, and we've hit on a lot of this, but first and foremost, the customers, their needs are changing. You've got to kind of adapt and roll and be flexible and have some strong first principles thinking. There are a number of solutions that we have in place today to help keep employees engaged at home, in the office, in a hybrid environment. And I think both John and Christophe echoed it a ton. Really making sure you're thinking about the whole person, what they need. What is it regionally? What is it in their own personal work? What do they have to do to be set up for success and support that? And I also think we touched on a lot of different practices for sales orgs that are returning to the office and travel. And again, there's going to be some regional differences there. And the key theme that they both said was the ROI needs to be just a little bit higher now. You can't just travel for just that one meeting, just like we would have before, where it would have been no challenge just to hop on a plane to seal the deal. So we've got some questions in the Q&A panel, and we've got a little bit of time left. So let's take a couple questions here. And our first question coming in, what are some of the best ways that your team has adapted to selling remotely? And we've touched on a lot here, but I think we can, John and Christophe, we can talk about this and maybe take this in the direction of some interesting tactics or things that you've picked up along the way, or that you've seen your team pick up. And John, let's start with you on this one, and then Christophe, you can certainly weigh in as well.
I think the first thing I'd say is the way we need to collect best practices amongst the sales team has had to change a little. I believe I've been in sales for well over a decade. Sales is a team sport, right? You might think, oh, I have my quota, I'm the master of my own destiny. But Well, great salespeople know it's not true. You are utterly dependent on the hardworking tech people, support people, other folks who make the product easy and simple to use behind the scenes. And you are a coach and a coachee to the folks around you. The best salespeople are always learning from their peers. And so in the office where you're all sitting together, even if it's a few days a week, like you get that, right? You get that cross-fertilization, and it's harder when you're in your room, in your office, in your bedroom, having Zoom calls all day, by yourself. So a lot of how we've adapted is to kind of like, when there is a best practice, to kind of create a template, to have a training, to send that training out, to create some discussion around it. So we are cross-fertilizing ideas in the same way that if we were in the office together. Now, I think some of those best practice ideas have been how to really spark great conversations and how to create more links with people who are decision makers. Because as the range of Uber products has expanded beyond rideshare to Eats to vouchers, to ways to kind of get customers in the door and employees happier, the number of people who can buy in an organization has greatly increased, which is super cool. As an account manager, this is our dream. You don't want to just have one thing. You want as many things to sell. You want the sell to keep going and going, because each sell reinforces the products you already have, opens doors for products they may not have. And so a lot of what my team has been learning is how to help products go viral in a remote environment. I've talked about, how you can use Uber Eats for vouchers or for catering or for events. We have created simple ways for executive assistants, for event planners to not just use the product, but share the product and put it up on their discussion boards. And in that way, the selling does itself, because it's not even us trying to push this at a customer. It's customers telling their peers that, hey, this way is so much easier to plan my event, or there's such a better restaurant selection, or, it's super trackable. I can really make sure I don't go over my budget. All these things, they just put up on their own discussion boards, they forward in emails, and we've seen so many sales happen, $1,000, $2,000 a time, because customers within the company are telling other customers. And I think that is a hallmark of the remote selling environment.
That's such an important part of just the evolution of business. And what John hit on right there is this microcosm of creating advocates and making your product something that organizations really love, and it becomes a habit in a good way, where it's something that they have to have and it's something that's necessary for how they're doing it. Christophe, what have any strategies or tips or tricks or things that you've seen as your team has adapted that you're going to certainly carry forward from a selling standpoint?
Yes, I think, and very similar to what John just mentioned, is the learning and sharing, I think, is essential, because in a very fluid environment, you can learn a lot from what's happening all around the world. And if there is a good idea, maybe your team has already found it. So that's super important. The second point for me is, at a time of stress, because like a pandemic, it's a stressful moment, it's important to keep the team focused. So you take a vertical or some verticals, take some use cases, and then you win or you fail. You win or you fail fast. So don't go after too many opportunities. Focus, do things well. If you win, you continue and you double down. If you fail, it's fine. Just go to the next opportunity and the next initiative. And then for me, what I have seen also from the winning teams around me is this ability to be super disciplined in the way you go to market and in the way you address customer needs and expectations. But you also need to find a way to keep time, to have casual moments and have nice and fun moments as a team. Super important.
Well, and Christophe, that's a great point. That actually leads into our next question, which is being available online all the time can be a double-edged sword. How have you helped your team balance that state of kind of ever on connectedness between work and personal life?
Listen, I'm not saying that there is like one solution to that very complex and difficult question. For me, I try to ask questions and understand what were the constraints of the people. Like for some of them, it was to have dinner with their kids at 6 or 7 p.m. For me, my children are older, so I have other constraints. I think understanding a little bit more of the personal life and personal constraints of the people is super important. And also as a manager, I think there is a duty to be able to tell people to stop working. So after a certain time, a certain hour in the day or during weekends, no, is people need to respect the fact that they have a personal life, and if they want to be efficient at work, they need to be happy in their personal life, or as happy as they can be in the current circumstances.
I think there's probably a webinar on that topic alone for us to cover at another time. But John, what else are you doing to make sure that your team is avoiding or overcoming burnout or overwhelmness? Because we're always on, and commutes maybe 17 steps as opposed to a proper commute.
Nah. Yeah, I think Christophe said it pretty well, and I do think the Europeans do this the best. Having lived in Europe myself for 7 years, there is a different culture, a much more balanced culture, which I think in other parts of the world we could probably learn a few things from. I think two things come to mind in this question. I think you have to show that practically. And again, I spoke of some of the things that Uber did for its employees in terms of providing actual benefits of how to work from home, about having, certain days and vacations and things like that, and as well as supporting folks' mental health and they're kind of make their decisions. Ultimately, it's a custom thing. Ultimately, every individual and what work and personal balance looks like is personal. I think what comes to mind is there is this, I don't know what study it is, I'm probably going to butcher it, but there is this notion that, as a manager, you need to say kind of like 5 encouraging things for one, developmental or negative feedback, because the things which are negative and developmental, like shout so much louder that you have to kind of like over shout and over repeat the things that are working well, because people just tune it out. We're just so used to focusing on criticism improvement, right? I think for people who work at the kind of companies who are attending this webinar, there's probably a similarity when it comes to work. The kind of people we've hired, they really enjoy work. And even to the extent to which some parts of work are not that enjoyable, they see work as critical to their life success, and they just want to do a good job, regardless of what the rewards are. We want that satisfaction, willing to work hard, we've studied hard for it, which means that we will interpret signals in the world. We'll hear things that say to us, work harder, work longer, work more. And we'll kind of tune out things that say like, oh, you can take a break. Here's a boundary. Take a vacation. Make sure you use the time off. So what that means as managers and as coaches is we need to shout much louder about ways to give people the permission to find balance. So for example, like very practically, I make sure that when I'm going on leave, number one, I take my leave. What I do, it's advertised. And when I take that leave, it's advertised. I really set my own office saying, I'm not going to be contactable. I set an example of like, hey, please don't speak to me, during this time. For those who are very good at math, you worked out that we had our 1-year-old during the pandemic, and Uber is very generous. There was 18 weeks parental leave, and I made sure I took it. And when I took it, it wasn't like, I'm on leave, but I'm still taking meetings. Like, no, we have a proper structure. Someone is covering for me, and I can really invest that time in family. And to me, partly that's a great gift to me and my family, but actually it's hopefully a gift to other folks in the organization to give them permission of like, all of us can take the time off. All of us must take that time off that we're entitled to keep ourselves sane. And whether that's kind of like an 18-week parental leave, a 1 or 2 week vacation multiple times a year, making sure you have start and stop times, modeling that, reinforcing that, telling folks again and again and again that this is important, because everything about the way we do work is going to scream, you can't afford to let your guard down. And we need to kind of fight a bit against that.
I think that's the masterclass right there. Model the behavior you want your employees to have, especially with things around taking time off. And I mean, John, that's incredible that you took that, right? You usually hear like, oh yeah, I took a couple days off, but don't worry, I was on mind-boggling that some people operate like that. We've got time for one more question, and this is a fun one, so no hard balls or anything like that for our last question. Christophe, what are you most looking forward to when you return to the office and when your team returns to the office?
Actually, I am in the office today. But when we are all together is I think a little bit of banter, good humor, and being able to have a drink all together. That's what I'm craving for.
Absolutely. John, what are you most looking forward to once the team can all get back in the office safely?
With Christophe being in the office, I kind of, before this call, I thought, oh, maybe like Christophe has these stickers about cleaning whiteboards after use and cleaning up just around his house because he's so organized. We're very jealous that the Europeans have returned to the office. On a bit of a fun note, we have the great privilege of a new San Francisco office open up, our headquarters, over the past year during the pandemic. And it's super cool. It's next to the Golden State Warriors, our basketball team stadium, and so I am looking forward to kind of like seeing the kind of cool little things that we have in the beautiful San Francisco Bay. But, as Christophe said, more importantly, just got to do that together, having a meal together face to face, shaking someone's hand, getting in a whiteboard, having a brainstorming session, and then, yes, please, wiping it and cleaning the whiteboard after use. All these things I kind of miss, and I'm super excited about getting to do that again, with many of the team.
All of those things sound wonderful. Grabbing drinks with people in the office, actually doing some work on a whiteboard. I'm looking forward to all of that as well. John, Christophe, we've covered a lot today. Before we wrap, thank you for taking the questions. Thank you for taking some time today. But really, one key takeaway for our attendees that we want to leave them with. John, let's start with you, and then Christophe, we'll wrap with you here.
Thanks, Richard. And I will use my opportunity to give just a bit of a sales pitch, seeing we are in sales after all. I think one of the things that we touched on during this conversation, which was cool, is that great companies make things easy for customers' employees. And if you think about, me and Christophe's experience, having led B2B organizations within great B2C companies like Google, like Agencia, the organization, that Christophe helped create, and Expedia. What we are able to do is take a beautiful B2C experience and make it easy for people doing B2B. And that's what these companies have done. Apple, Amazon, Google, they've taken this and they've made Gmail or the iPad or whatever it is able for business because it's just as easy as consumer. And so I think my sales pitch is Uber for Business is that. We take what is easy about Uber and take it for business. And that's something where, that's the reason why me and Christophe joined. That's why we're excited about this product, and we hope that you are too. But the real takeaway is that's what we need to do for our employees and our customers. We need to make sure that the way they do expenses, the way they get around, the way they eat, the way they get to your store is just easy. And so figure out how to do that in a post-pandemic and a hybrid world is really what our challenge is as managers and leaders. And I'm very excited to partner with each of you on that.
Remove the friction. I mean, that's such a great point. Christophe, last but certainly not least, key takeaway for our audience.
I think we can see the light out of the tunnel on this pandemic, at least in some markets. So we are all happy about it. It will be great to come back to our teams, to our customers, etc. At the same time, I really believe that we need to build on what we have learned. We have learned a lot, like the consumerization of the enterprise has accelerated, and we shouldn't forget the best practices that we have developed over the past 12 months or 15 months. So I think the world will never be the same, and there are lots of learnings that we will have to build upon.
Well, cheers to that. John, Christophe, I know you're incredibly busy. Thank you so much for taking some time today to share your perspectives and share all of your stories. I hope you stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye.
Richard. Thanks, Christophe. Bye-bye.
Cheers.